So, today we're going to start off just mentioning the Elder Wand. I'm looking at a PowerPoint, but this video is all about knowledge. The word for all-knowing is omniscient, to know somebody that knows the future. Dumbledore, as a wizard, is extremely wise and kind of predicts a lot of things, has a lot of control over Harry Potter in terms of the plans that he has for him, even when he knows that he's got to die. So what we're looking at is the concept of God as omniscient. If you watch the movie Glass by M. Night Shyamalan, you'll see a lot of stuff about predicting the future in that as well. So that it's completely relevant, and it'll also help my phone to balance on it. Okay. So, let's just get in position, have a little sit down. So, you will be able to explain the problem of the compatibility of omniscience. Remember, that means God is all-knowing. Science is knowledge. That's omni means all. Science means knowledge. That's where the word science comes from. So it's, even though it's a religious term, it's connected with science itself. So is it possible for us to be free if God knows everything? To evaluate solutions to this problem. Sorry. Now, an interesting question is to think, without omniscience, can there be justice? So if God doesn't know everything, say for example there was a guy that killed his wife and dropped her body into I think it was Lake Windermere in the Lake District, and for years and years and years and years, nobody knew it was him. Eventually, the police did catch him because they found that some divers found the body, and he was caught. Now, imagine he hadn't been caught. If God isn't omniscient and he died without getting justice, then that would be the universe would be unfair. So even if somebody gets away with something in this life, they won't get away with it in the next. Does that mean God has to be omniscient for that to take place? Right. Getting a bit more complicated now. So, some philosophers and scientists think that freedom is an illusion. This is called liberty of spontaneity. And then a split between hard and soft determinism. This deterministic model, or Newtonian model, goes against modern physics, which suggests that randomness is at the heart of the universe. So, this is the free will argument, also known as liberty of indifference or libertarianism. There is a randomness at the heart of the universe. Chaos and randomness exist at the particle level, therefore, humans are not determined. If this is true and humans are genuinely free, then this raises the questions of whether God can know what humans will do in their future. So does omniscience rule out free will? This depends on the model of God we take. Two types of models. A holy, simple God, which I'll go into in a bit more detail in a minute, is a God that is outside of time. So God doesn't exist in time. In the sci-fi drama Red Dwarf, it's set in the future and it's on a big ship, and the character Lister he's punished for a misdemeanor, and he gets put inside this thing called a stasis booth. And the stasis booth, time doesn't affect you when you're in there, so he doesn't get, even though he's kind of being punished for a while, he doesn't get any older. So God is outside of time, and God is outside of space. The TARDIS is kind of outside of space in a way, because you go inside it and it's totally different. It's massive on the inside and small on the outside. So that's a holy, simple God. The everlasting God is a God that is in time and affected by time. So God actually maybe can suffer even. God is holy, simple. God has no parts. He can't be split into parts because he's not a physical entity. God is not in time and space, which I've just explained. God has no body, because if he had a body, then he would be in space. He would be in a particular space. In Star Trek, they can transport you from one space to another. But to be outside of space, it's almost like you're in a different dimension. God has no potential. I mentioned this in an Aristotle PowerPoint. There's a difference between potentiality and actuality. God has, because God's perfect, God is fully actualized. God is immutable. Do you know what immutable means? It means that God cannot change. God is necessary. This relates to the cosmological argument. God is not contingent. God is not dependent on anything else. God is a necessary being. So God always exists. Look at the illustration here. You've got the eye representing the transcendence of God. God doesn't really have an actual physical eye, but God can see, even though he doesn't have an actual physical eye. If God sees all events, including the future, so he can see what's going on in the ancient world, he can see what's happening 2,000 years in the future, can we really be free, or does it mean we are actually like robots? Aquinas and Augustine think that God sees all events in time simultaneously. Transcendent, holy, simple. So, two explanations. Explanation one, it is God's knowledge that causes events to happen. Aquinas or Augustine. Hopefully you'll be able to work out why I have placed the picture of Pinocchio there. I'll just give you a second to think about it. Geppetto is like a puppet master, so it's like he's controlling Pinocchio. Eventually in the story Pinocchio becomes a real boy and makes his own free decisions. So that's the question, is like, not all of Pinocchio does end up with free will, but God can be seen as a puppet master. For the knowledge of God is to all creatures what the knowledge of the Maker is to things made by his art. The form in the intellect must be the principle of action. Thomas Aquinas. Does God mold us like a sculptor molds the clay to make the statue? In Islam, they use the term inshallah. God knows everything, God willing. Hopefully God wills us to do things. So it's related to the idea of God is omniscient. Calvinism believe in predestination, that it's already decided in advance whether you're going to go to heaven or hell. St. Augustine said, "For to confess that God exists and at the same time to deny that he has foreknowledge of future things is the most manifest folly. One who is not prescient of all future things is not God." Augustine. I hope you like the Larry Larson cartoon, God at his computer. So is God actually causing events? If he's omniscient, is he actually causing events to happen? They're like the piano to drop on the poor guy. John Calvin says, when we attribute foreknowledge to God, we mean all things have ever been and perpetually remain before his eyes, so that to his knowledge nothing is future or past, but all things are present. He holds and sees them as if actually placed before him. So, again, similar model to before, we have the road of time. God is on a mountain. So, you can imagine God can see everything simultaneously. God is looking down on a road that's curving around the mountain. He sees all events simultaneously. Aquinas says, he who goes along the road does not see after him, because the road is curving round the top of the mountain, whereas he who sees the whole road from a height sees at once all travelling on it. So God is seeing everything happening at once. He's seeing the Colosseum being built and the gladiators fighting in the Colosseum at the same time as he sees this amazing kind of futuristic train. Because he's transcendent. He's outside. He's not in time. He's outside of time. So, Augustine compared it to having a friend that you know very well, knowing that he is about to sin. Similarly, God compels no man to sin, though he sees beforehand that they are going to sin by their own will. God foresees that Adam and Eve are going to eat the apple. He's omniscient, so he knows exactly what they're going to do, even though he doesn't want them to do it. And so has a plan, a futuristic plan, to sort things out because he's going to have to kick them out the Garden of Eden, but there's always a way back, and that's the way back for Christians is through Jesus. God is omniscient. He sees that they're going to eat the apple, so he sends Jesus down onto the earth. Jesus incarnates as a human and saves humanity from their sins. If humans can only take a path already known by God, then is God responsible for all evil? So, example, if a psychiatrist has a detailed knowledge and understanding of a paedophile and knows they will reoffend, but nevertheless allows them to be released, is he responsible for any criminal acts caused? The sad story of Ian Huntley would be an example that you could use for that, who killed 2 girls. He was on the sex offenders. There wasn't a sex offenders register before him. Occam says, if God's knowledge is immutable, so does not change. Occam says, although God's knowledge is immutable, it is still contingent. He says that God's knowledge is necessary, but it is not part of the essence of God. Can this really work? Does Occam want to have his cake and eat it? I'll just read out the joke that's there. There it was, the same piece of cake he ate yesterday. His time machine really worked. Think of the possibilities. He could have his cake and eat it too. So explanation 2, we've had explanation 1. Explanation 2 is that human actions cause God to know what happens. So God still sees events timelessly, but it's human actions that cause God to know what happens. But this would mean that God's knowledge is subject to events within the contingent universe. Does this go against the idea of God being wholly simple? That's Peter Vardy. an amazing lecturer who worked at Heathrow College. Explanation 3, God as everlasting, a being in time who does not actually know the future. So God would know each individual extremely well and be excellent at predicting. God knows all that is logically possible to know, and this would not include the future, because that fits with the particular idea of chaos, randomness at the particle level. With this true freedom, humans can choose to respond with God to God with love or not. Problems? So the conclusion is, if we want to preserve both omniscience, the idea that God is all-knowing, and free will, we would have to take the everlasting model of God. We would have to believe in libertarianism, liberty of indifference. What could this be at the expense of? I'll go back. What could this be at the expense of? So I hope you've had a little think about that. Just give you another minute. When I ask that question, what I'm really trying to get you to think about is the characteristics of God, the Judeo-Christian characteristics of God. In order to hold on to the idea that there's true free will, and God can't really know exactly what we're going to do, does that mean that God's not really all powerful? Is it really can we really call that all knowing? To be all knowing, do you have to have knowledge of the future as well? That's the key question for you to think about. I can't answer that for you. You've got 3 alternatives there. If you can come up with another alternative answer, then please let me know. So coming back to glass. Are we really free? Glass looks at the idea of superheroes, and I don't want to spoil it for you anyway. Dumbledore kind of predicts what Harry's going to do in certain situations, but does he know exactly what Harry's going to do? Does he know exactly that Harry is going to face Lord Voldemort and choose to give up his life? Does Dumbledore know that when Voldemort tries to kill Harry, that the Horcrux will be destroyed? That's an interesting question, isn't it? Okay, I hope that you've enjoyed Philosophy Bites. Please leave comments. I'd be very interested to hear what you've got to say about this, because I think it's a very important question in the philosophy of religion. Are we really free? Is God all-knowing? Thank you. Bye.